Morning. We're going to start off with just a little bit of a personal story. When I moved to Prague in 1995, 1900 somewhere in there, 1995, I came back and I was talking with a friend of mine, over furlough, like a year later or something like that, and he said, "Man, is it just like a spiritual high all the time? Are you just absolutely just amazed at everything that is going on, and it must just be wonderful." And I sat there and I thought, whew, that's not the experience I'm having. It's tough. I'm trying to learn a language that is difficult, and I come home every night with a headache because I've been struggling with what people have been saying to me. I see things and I can't really interpret exactly what's going on. I'm among a bunch of people who don't believe in God at all. It's one of the most atheistic countries in the entire world. I'm not feeling it. And so, when I was trying to explain that and think about it, I realized, I'm not sure exactly that we always understand exactly what struggle we're in at any given time. And sometimes, when we go through difficult times, we allow certain things to just kind of slip out of our lives very easily. And one of the things that I noticed when I was living over there is I would come home from, having a Bible study or doing something or planning something, and I would make my dinner up real quick, and I would kind of eat it as I was going along, and I recognized that I was allowing one thing to slip that I had never let slip in my entire life, and that was praying before my meal. It was the first time that I'd really lived completely on my own, and so I would kind of like eat and kind of like, okay, I'll go back to the fridge and I'll have my second course or something like this. And I realized I wasn't giving thanks. And so what I did was I came up with a little sign, and I was 27 years old. So what I had on my sign was a little bit 27-ish. But I said, go ahead and chow down, but be thankful. And so it just reminded me that I needed to be thanking God for my food. And I need to be thanking God in general. And so that helps me kind of recalibrate and think about exactly what I was doing. I think that is kind of something that we realize is important for all of us. We sometimes need recalibration. And I love this time of year. You guys know it. Thanksgiving is my favorite time of the year. I love it. I love it more than Christmas because it can't get commercialized. There's something about it that just doesn't allow that to happen. And so I think that this allows us to recalibrate and allows us to think. And I see this in the Bible as God himself wanted people to think about being thankful. In fact, as he leads his people out of Egypt, out of slavery, he makes a holiday. And the holiday is called the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Tents, or the Feast of Booths, depending on what version you have. And the Israelites, what they were supposed to do, and you can find this in Leviticus chapter 23, and you can find this in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 13. And it may be something that you want to just kind of talk about in your Thanksgiving meals maybe this week. Maybe this was one of the first Thanksgiving celebrations that we can look at and see how it was done. But the Israelites were told, when you enter into the promised land, God is going to take care of you. And you are going to reap a harvest because I am going to be good to you. And I'm going to make sure that you have everything that you need. And as you do this, and as you get the produce from your threshing floor, if we take a look at Deuteronomy 16, and from your winepress, be joyful at your feast, your sons and your daughters, and your manservants and your maidservants, and the Levites, the aliens, and everybody. Make sure that you celebrate for 7 days. And although you may be living in a house at that time, I want you to go out and I want you to have this feast inside of a tent. You're going to live in a tent. And it's going to remind you of the time that you were in the desert and that you lived in tents. And it's going to remind you that I provided manna for you in the desert, and I provided quail for you in the desert. But it's also going to remind you that I am providing for you right now. And it's a time of recalibration where we think about things and we realize that, hey, we have much to be thankful for. As we approach this particular season of Thanksgiving, as we approach this, I think that there are several things that Thanksgiving does for us that we can take to heart and make part of our lives. And I think that, as people often say, well, let's make Christmas a year-long thing, I think we also need to make sure that we are making Thanksgiving part of our daily, weekly routine to be thankful. Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is our debt of gratitude. If we take a look at Luke chapter 17, verses 11 through 19, we have a situation here, and we know this situation. It says, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, and he traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee, and as he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him, and they stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us, because they can't get anywhere close to anybody. They can't be near anybody because they are unclean. They have leprosy. It is a contagious disease, and they had to give up all of everything that they ever knew. They had to be away from people. They had to be away from their families. And Jesus saw them and he says, go show yourselves to the priests. And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. And he threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. And Jesus asked, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he said to him, rise and go, your faith has made you well. And there is so much in this particular passage that we could get out of it. We could spend an entire Thanksgiving sermon on this particular passage. We're not going to do that. I just want to point out this, though. That this Samaritan recognized that he owed a debt of gratitude for something that he could not do himself. And so he comes back to Jesus, joyful, throws himself at Jesus' feet, praises God, and is thankful for what he has been given. If we take a look at Romans chapter 7, we have Paul's story. And Paul, in the entire chapter of chapter 7, he starts talking about how he is struggling. And it really starts in verse 7 of chapter 7. And he talks about the law, and he talks about sin, and he talks about all of this. And as we take a look at what he is wrestling with, as we take a look at verse 14, it says this, we know that the law is spiritual. We know that. But I am unspiritual, sold as a slave to sin. We have that bondage imagery. The same imagery that we have when the Israelites were taken out of Egypt. I am a slave to sin. I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is the sin living in me. I know that nothing good lives in me, that is, in my sinful nature, for I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. And so we have a situation where Paul is recognizing his hopelessness. For what I do is not the good I want to do. No, the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who does it, but it is the sin living in me. So I find this law at work. When I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being I delight in God's law, but I see another law at work in the members of my body, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within my members. What a wretched man I am! Who will rescue me from this body of death? And so we have this situation, and you can see the angst, and we can see the absolute hopelessness of Paul in this particular situation as he takes a look at who he is, and he can take a look at the law. And he, of all people, having been a Pharisee, having tried to make sure that he was following the law perfectly, he can take a look at this and say, I am helpless to do this. I cannot do it. Verse 25, thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. he recognized his debt of gratitude. He recognized that he himself could not do what needed to be done. We sing that song, he paid a debt he did not owe. I owed a debt I could not pay. I needed someone to wash my sins away. And now I sing a brand new song, Amazing Grace. The reason why that song resonates to us so much, resonates in us so much, is because we recognize that. And we are thankful for what he has done. We see this in Hebrews chapter 12, and we'll go back there a couple of times, but I want us to take a look at Hebrews chapter 12 in this particular context. It says on this, God, or the writer of Hebrews is talking about what we have in Jesus Christ, and he talks about in chapter 11 all that hall of fame of faith, and he talks about how we need to be running with perseverance the race that Christ has set out for us. We need to be doing all that. But then what we find is, because we have done this, in verse 28, therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. Can you imagine? We are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. We are not deserving of this kingdom ourselves. Yet, through the mercy and grace of God through Jesus Christ, we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. Let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for God is a consuming fire. And so we see this. We also see that thanksgiving fills us with joy. And we can take a look at several different passages here. And I want us to take a look at what we have going on in Psalm 100. The Psalms are filled with all sorts of passages that are filled with thanksgiving for what God has done or what he is going to do. And in this particular passage it says, shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Did we just sing this? Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name, for the Lord is good and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations. Thanksgiving fills us with a sense of joy. It fills us with that, and it takes a hold of us and makes us joyful in that thanks. I love what happens in Acts chapter 3, verses 1 through 10. And in that particular passage, we have Peter and John, and they're going up to the temple at the time of prayer at 3 in the afternoon. And there was a crippled man there who was there from birth, and he was always at the gate called Beautiful, and he was there to beg. Peter and John look at him. And Peter said, look at us. So the man gave them his attention, expecting to get something from them. Oh yeah, he's about to get something from them, isn't he? Peter said, silver and gold I do not have, but what I have I give you in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Walk. Taking him by his right hand, he helped him up, and instantly the man's feet and ankles became strong. Hey, this is pretty good. I can walk. Thanks a lot, guys. That's not what we see this man doing. That's not what we see him doing at all. He jumped to his feet and began to walk. Then he went with him into the temple courts, walking and jumping and praising God. It filled him with joy. He is thankful for what he has been given. It was a debt that he could not pay, and as he is giving thanks, he is joyful in that process. It fills us with joy to know what God has done for us. We see a similar situation in Acts chapter 8, and we were just there not very long ago with Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. And what we have in that particular passage is a situation in which Philip is explaining to the eunuch the way of salvation. And he says, look, I want to explain who Jesus is. And I want to explain to you what you need to do. And we find that Philip and the eunuch, as they are traveling along, they come to some water, and the eunuch said, look, here's water. Why shouldn't I be baptized? He orders the chariot to stop, and both Philip and the eunuch went down into the water, and Philip baptized him. When they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord suddenly took Philip away. But what does this eunuch do? He did not see him again, but went on his way rejoicing. And we have this situation where he is filled with joy because of what God has done in his life. But another thing that it does, thanksgiving breeds contentment and strengthens faith. This is incredibly important for us to realize. I want us to take a look at the 1 Timothy passage. And somehow that did not get into my outline here. But anyway, the 1 Timothy passage, you guys have it, and it's the one I wanted to look at. First Timothy 6, and I think that this is important for us because as I take a look at this world, one of the things that the world is really good at, it's really good at robbing us of our contentment. As we take a look at the news, as we take a look at our world situation, as we take a look at financial situation, we take a look at all that, the world is constantly trying to rob us of our contentment. And let's not beat around the bush. The world has been successful in a lot of ways. The last couple of years have been tough. We recognize that. And that is why it is more important than ever for us to be thankful and for us to recognize our need to be thankful. Paul writes Timothy this way, and he says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it." And I think that this is important. Somehow, we think somehow that by losing any of the things that we've lost somehow, we need to bemoan that fact. Paul calls us back to what we were. We came into this world with nothing. We're going to leave it with nothing. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Thanksgiving breeds contentment as we focus on the things that we have been given by God undeservedly. As we do that, it breeds that contentment. In 1 Thessalonians 5:18, and I am flipping all over the place. 1 Thessalonians 5:18. What we have in here, let's just go back to verse 16. "Be joyful always, pray continually. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus." In Philippians, the book of Philippians is one of those absolutely amazing gems in the Bible. It has so many positive messages in it, but I think one of the reasons why it has that positive message is that this particular church was dealing with some internal problems that were really tearing it apart. And so Paul, when he is talking to them and we hear these words from Paul, what we have to realize is the context of this is a situation where people could really get into a funk if they wanted to. They can take a look at the church, and they can take a look at the church situation, and they can see what is going on, and they can really, really go home feeling a little bit discouraged, maybe a lot discouraged. And as I take a look at the situation of the churches in the United States today and what we have gone through COVID-19, numbers are down all across the board. Churches are suffering. And we can worry about that. And I think we need to plan and we need to think about how we can bring people back. Because there are some people who are falling away, and that can really be a drag on our own mental thankfulness. But we see that Paul is talking about this in a different type of way. And I think that rejoicing and thankfulness and contentment are all part and parcel of the same thing. After Paul talks about all sorts of different things about being united with Christ and having the unity of the body and having the attitude of Jesus Christ and shining the stars, and he talks about Epaphroditus who was sick but has been restored to health, he comes to verse 1 in chapter 3, and he says this: "Finally, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord." And I want you to know something about this rejoicing in the Lord that's very important here. It is no trouble at all for me to write you these things, these same things to you again. But what I really want you to understand, Philippians, is it is a safeguard for you. If you have this attitude of thankfulness, if you have this attitude of rejoicing in the Lord, then these other things fall away. He continues in 4. It's one of the passages that we recite almost most often in this congregation, almost more often than any other passage in Scripture. But it says, rejoice in the Lord. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident in all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything. Don't be anxious about anything that's going on in the world. Don't be anxious about anything that's going on in the church. Don't be anxious about anything that is going on in your personal life. Don't be anxious. Don't let these situations rob you of your contentment. Don't let them rob you of your joy. Don't let them rob you of your debt of thanksgiving. Don't do it. But in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Jesus Christ. That will happen. We also find that it strengthens faith. In verses 10 through 11, 10 through 13, Paul is talking about his entire situation, about his own personal situation, and he says, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you have renewed your concern for me. It brings me great joy to know that you're thinking about me. Indeed, you have been concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned. I've learned something, and I am strengthened in my faith because of it. I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. Whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want, I can do everything through him who gives me strength. And I think about those passages that we've seen in the last few weeks where Paul and Silas are in prison, and what are they doing? They're thanking God, and they're singing to God, and they're giving praise to God. Learns to be content in all circumstances, giving thanksgiving. Thanksgiving breeds contentment, and it strengthens faith. I think that is a lesson that we need today. I think that it is a lesson that we need every single week. No, I'm not going to give a Thanksgiving sermon every single week, but I tell you what, I'm always tempted to when we get to Thanksgiving, because it is such a powerful, powerful safeguard for us. May we truly be thankful. If you are not Jesus' child yet, if you are not a child of the King, then your debt isn't paid yet. You can be thankful for all sorts of things, and Paul talks about how everybody on this planet is a recipient of God's grace in getting the things that we have been given. He talks to the Athenians about that when he says, look, you have been given rain in its season. You've been given sun in its season. You harvest your crops. There is much to be thankful for, but you are missing out on the most important thing that you can be given, and that is salvation. And so if today is the day that you decide you want to be his child, there is a way to do that, and we talk about this often. You need to put yourself to death in the waters of baptism. You need to submit yourself to that death. You need to come out of that water, joining Jesus Christ in his death, burial, and resurrection, and allowing yourself to be raised to new life. If that is your desire today, if you're out there online and that is your desire today, let us know. Please come. Stand and sing.